Julian, I'm now going to hand over to you. Maybe you could give us your background, introduce yourself, and we'll start asking questions.
Yeah, great to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Julian Lange, actually, so I'm a German national, even though Patrick pronounced it like I'm French, but I guess Spendesk is French, so you're used to pronouncing everything in French, yeah?
Sorry.
It's okay. We're old friends, of course. I'm originally from Hamburg, and currently with a Finnish company called Aiven. Also something that is regularly mispronounced, because it's a lot of people say Aiven, but apparently it's Aiven. And my background actually is I started in finance as a trainee way back when in General Electric. I think just today it came out that GE is finally getting dissolved into different companies. So if I get a bit emotional towards the end, you know why? Because I had a great career there and worked in a lot of different parts of GE. So I was originally a trainee in financial services, which is, I guess, a huge part of the reason why GE later almost dissolved. And then I was in plastics and aviation. I spent a few years actually in energy. So I was in the headquarters for some time. So I had a great experience at the time when it was still active in so many different businesses. And then, after 10 years, I wanted to change a bit the direction of my career, and I had this opportunity to start something with the founders of Marley Spoon. So they approached me maybe 3 months after founding, and then I started 6 months after Marley Spoon was founded in 2014. Basically, no revenue at the time, maybe 50 people. And fast forward in 6 years, we built it into a $300 million business, global business in Australia, US, and Europe, and we listed the company in 2018. Last year it was profitable and cash flow positive, so was a great ride to build a truly global organization with 1,500 people. And I'm sure in some of my answers I'll go into some of my experiences in a bit more detail. But after 6 years and getting the company to profitability with the rest of the team, I guess that was a bit the time to look for something new, and I couldn't think of anything that's more different to Marley Spoon is a direct-to-consumer food business. And then I did now we're doing at Aiven, we're doing software, quite a technical software topic. So I won't even try to explain it here. And B2B, of course, And so I have no prior software knowledge, so I just kind of picked software because I said, let me not do something that's very similar, because I like this kind of, back in my GE days, right? I switched segments quite a few times, and I guess that's what lured me into the software business now. And Aiven is an interesting has been an interesting journey. So right when I joined earlier this year, we raised money from Atomico and a couple others at 800 million valuation, and now just recently, if you followed the news maybe on Aiven, we raised again for 2 billion. So it's a fast-growing business. It's not just that investors are paying crazy multiples, but the business also growing quite nicely. So over 100% growth since I joined in January, for example. So that's also an interesting piece. But I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure we'll go into my first months at Aiven and my experience at Marley Spoon as part of your questions. Anyway.
Well, and if anybody wants a little bit more background on that Marley Spoon experience, Ali just shared one more link there from an article we did together almost 2 years ago now, I would say. And we probably need to do a new one. It sounds a new one about Aiven.
Give it a bit more time. So I have more things to tell. So 2 years ago at Marley Spoon, I already had years and years of good stories. So
for sure,
still collecting them. All right.
Now we're going to get into the AMA, and we need to give a little bit of background because 6 weeks ago, roughly, you joined us for our CFO Connect Summit, which was very kind of you, and we thought the summit was a big success. But as part of that, you helped lead a session on the first 100 days as a new CFO. And obviously it was really popular because we had more than 20 questions left over. So those are the ones we didn't even get to, let alone all the ones that you did answer. And so you had the very kind idea and thought that you'd like to tackle some of those questions. in another webinar, which is where we'll start today. Today in this webinar. So we do have some of those questions prepared. We'll dive into those. But if, as you are listening, you have reactions that you want to give, you have new questions you want to ask, please do ask them, because we want this to be an AMA, despite the fact that we have some questions prepared already. But with that said, I'm going to start with the first one. And it was a really interesting one that I sort of wish we'd had time to do last time, but we get to do it now, which is, what's your view on how far a CFO should go to drive revenue? What's the CFO's role in driving revenue?
I think you go quite far. Would be my short answer. It depends, of course, what company you're in and how important revenue and growth are. But let's assume most of the audience here, just like Marley Spoon, Aiven, you're in kind of a high growth environment, so revenue is super important. So if it's important to the business, it should be important to finance. Yeah, that's anyway kind of probably a running rule I have on a lot of different things. But at Marley Spoon, to give you some examples, every week I was sitting with the CMO, and we looked at marketing metrics, right? So we had these huge Excel sheets with the different products, the different markets that we were in, and looking at different metrics and how did the campaigns from last week perform? How did customer behavior change? These kind of. So we looked every week, sat down, and made these budget allocation decisions really almost in real time. Yeah? And to give you one tangible outcome from this was, for example, so Marley Spoon was listed at the end. It was listed in Australia. And why was that so? Even though we were founded in Berlin and we started in the US, a bigger market at the same time, but we looked at these metrics every week, and we saw that Australia was going in a way better. Like we had better customer behavior, slightly better basket size. So some of these key metrics, it made more sense to invest our marketing dollars in Australia, or invest them there first and then give to the other markets. So then that became we grew into, this was for a long time, our largest business unit was Australia, and that even meant we were going public in Australia, So just as an example of how, you can get involved and steer kind of the overall direction of the company, right? Just by looking at revenue. And maybe an example also at Aiven here for my first few months, it's obviously a bit of a different animal, this kind of B2C marketing environment where you look every week at metrics. That's not so important in what we do, right? Because we do B2B and it's longer sales processes and so on. But for example, one of the things I worked on with someone from my team and the sales organization is really redoing the commissions rules or bonus rules for the sales teams, because we found that we were lagging a bit behind on certain metrics, and then we thought, okay, but how do we incentivize people so we get better at that. And also we added completely new teams into the sales function, right? So we started splitting up into different segments in sales, and that meant also that these people needed incentives that made sense to them, and then we changed certain other people's roles, so their old incentives didn't make sense. So this is maybe another example where I got involved quite deeply, because I understood that if we don't change that, then people are not going to behave and in a certain way, because they're incentivized for something completely different. So I think that's not just a couple of examples where I think you need to understand what's important to the business that you're in, what metrics matter, and if revenue matters, then understand what kind of, is it marketing or certain sales or commissions or incentives? What is the thing that you can help with that helps drive?
And I remember you telling me or telling us when we wrote that article previously as well, it can get quite granular, where you had members of your FP&A team working with essentially with the chefs, coming up with the recipes based on the margin of certain ingredients.
Yeah. So as we were then growing, for example, then we changed, or no, we never kind of let go of the focus on revenue and growth, of course, but as the numbers got bigger, it was clear that you also needed to start looking more at the margin, right? And that's why I'm saying, like, it's sometimes in the same company over the years, also your focus can change a bit more from growth to EBIT or to gross margin or whatever it is, and then that's where you spend your time in a way, right? So at Aiven, very much focused on growth still. Still very early stage, right? We just raised Series C, have tons more runway to grow. So I think that's by far the most, but we also start doing things on the margin, and that will probably only continue in the future. Yeah. So do you need to balance these topics by the business and at the time of the phase of the business?
I think perhaps it's sort of a related question from Nicholas. He's asking, how is the interaction with the rest of the team? And I assume what you mean, Nicholas, is outside of the finance teams, the rest of the company. That was an example of finance really being a business partner and being able to contribute to the overall company goals.
If that's what you mean here with the rest of the team, I mean, to me, finance is the ultimate function. Of course, I would say that, but the ultimate function that works with other functions, right? I mean, I cannot, usually when I do onboarding now at Aiven on kind of introduction to finance and our metrics and so on, I usually even say, like, there's really not that much, at least not that much interesting things that we do on our own, right? So we do certain tax filings and you know, some stuff with banks and so on that again is not very interesting. So the real, like, these tend to be a lot more on kind of, you know, hygiene factor type of things. But the real interesting stuff, the impact on the business, you can do by collaborating with your colleagues from all kinds of other functions, right? So again, I mean, you could collaborate with all of them. So you need to be a bit mindful of what do I do first, depending on the industry you're in and the phase you're in. But over the years at Marley Spoon, I mean, I can give you an example with each function, from engineering to procurement to operations to marketing, what we did or people from my team did with them. And as you said, Patrick, going quite into some details. Yeah.
And aside from collaboration, yes, on top of collaboration, are there specific responsibilities or other focuses that you think CFOs should take on besides the obvious financial ones, like FP&A and accounting and things? Are there other parts of the business that you really think you should be getting involved in?
At Marley Spoon, I think we probably mentioned it back then too. I took it even to another level, right? So I was head of operations for a year. So that maybe even taking it a bit too far. And after like 1 year, we figured that maybe we should hire someone who's really completely qualified in this. But I think I could help at the stage, right? So this was maybe 1 year into my tenure, or a bit less even. So this kind of the second year of the whole company, and we were starting to grow and had some problems in operations, like some growing pains, let's call it. And then we looked around the table, and I thought kind of I can bring some rigor and some process thinking and so on into that. From my GE days, GE is also like a physical product process heavy company, that I thought I picked up some things that could be helpful. And then I did that for a year and then let it go again, right? But it's maybe a good example of something where you can step out of your immediate finance role, whether you are a business controller or the CFO, and take over some kind of burning issue for the business, or something that will prove really impactful. Yeah, I mean, later on in my last year at Marley, I also led the European business. 20% of Marley's revenue, and we just had some team issues, leadership issue. Maybe we had a changeover in the GM of the European segment, and I said, hey, I can build a team, and I can get these guys kind of walking jointly in the right direction again. And that's what I did for about 9 months. Yeah. So I think be open to that. I think that to me made ultimately also my experience much more interesting than just, quote unquote finance. So I think we're in this, you're in a unique position to see these things and understand a lot about the business of all different elements. So why not take the opportunity, and for a project or for even a second hat that you're wearing, go into one of these other functions, or take something on that's not immediate finance scope. So I'm all for that if you can somehow fit it in and it makes sense for the
imagine
company.
some of that is sort of guided by the background that you come from as well, because in doing these sessions and in doing the podcast, we meet essentially two different kinds of CFOs: those who come from more of a consulting, auditing background in a PwC or BDO, etc., and then the much more classic accounting finance-oriented person. I wonder how you think that plays a role. You know, if you told us just now that you were able to use a lot of your experience from GE. And those people who come from that consulting background have that same ability. Do you think it's any different for someone who comes from a more traditional accounting background?
Yeah, probably. I guess it also has a lot more to do maybe than with your background than with your interest also, right? So I guess if you pick this classic accounting audit background, then it also maybe means you have a certain interest, right? So I never really, even at GE, I never really worked in accounting or hardcore controllership, or so to me this is all things I need to understand to some extent, but I'll never be fully passionate about it. So then I'm not going to be world class at that, right? So I'll be world class at something else that I'm much more interested in. So I think reflect on that, be fair to yourself, that there's no right or wrong, but then if you picked a certain career before, then it probably means something, but also it doesn't have to, right? So if you feel like, just like me, you picked finance kind of, but you have very varied interests, be it in industries or how a business works and so on, then by all means you can build that, right? But also be honest to yourself and say, I mean, you do not have to be and do what I did and then become head of operations, right? That's not the thing maybe you should even be doing. Yeah, maybe I could have provided more value as just the CFO at the time, but I think it needs to kind of make sense. But I for sure think there's a difference in kind of what you chose early in your career and what you probably like doing going forward. Yeah.
We had a question in the summit that I think relates very closely to a follow-up question from Nicholas. The question from the summit was, could you talk about successes or examples of educating your organization on the value of finance for the company? And what Nicholas is asking is, how do you bring people on board with financial decisions? I think the two are very closely related.
Yeah, I think and I'm going to butter up the audience here, but I think the way Nicholas asked it is better because what I had a bit the problem with how it was phrased in the other session was that it was like kind of educating, or it implied this kind of selling to the organization, right? And I think that's really, explaining I think is better, but educating or selling, I would say, is not what you need to do, right? I think people need to kind of value you and your different view and your understanding of things that maybe they don't know, a different perspective to maybe the same problem in its own right. Yeah. So to me, it's all about, you need to sweat the details so you understand the business, and then these people will come to you on their own and say, well, let me rather check with Julian or someone from his team so that I get a certain input that maybe I didn't think of. Yeah. So again, we sit really in the middle, to me, of the organization, so you can understand like cross-functional impacts. Yeah. The favorite example I always use is from Marley Spoon is change the packaging of the box. Yeah. So Marley Spoon is a meal kit company. We send you food in the box. So how many people need to be at the table to make that decision, right? And usually people underestimate this, right? It's not just the person who deals with the packaging, it's marketing for the design, right? It's probably logistics for the size, because if you change the size of the box, then it changes how many can fit in a pallet and in a truck, and then I could go through 3 more functions, and who is best, to kind of put in the middle of all this to moderate that process of making these decisions, right? And I think people need to see that in action, and they need to see how you brought value to a problem. Like, we want to change the packaging of Marley Spoon, but how do we best do this? And how do we decide in the end, should we go with this or that? Yeah. And how do we make those trade-offs? Is it better to maybe have a bigger box and then it's better for quality, so the ingredients don't get smushed, or should it be smaller and we save on logistics? Yeah. Finance can answer that, right? So to me, it's all about knowing your details, knowing especially these cross-functional kind of interactions or interdependencies. And then people see, let me rather check with finance, because they will think of ways of things that I maybe don't think about. And that's, to me, is the way to sell it, right? And to tell people. So, I mean, and I would say at Marley Spoon, we didn't have many kind of pre-approval rules and guidelines. You have to come to finance with this. but people kept coming anyway, right? Because they saw the value of the people in my team participating in some of these workouts and topics. Yeah. So I probably would say it that way, and you only get there by planning very detailed, analyzing every month close very detailed, and understanding these cross correlations in the business. So it's just hard detailed work that then you have a ticket to these decisions, and then you can prove your
Are those
value.
principles the same when you're dealing with other members of the C-suite, particularly, I guess, founders and the CEO? Is it still just about proving your value by being so in the details, or do you have some specific principles that you try to follow when dealing with those C-suite leaders?
Yeah. In the details is one, but having also this different perspective, maybe, right? Because especially, I mean, you mentioned the CEO as an example, so that's true for both now at Aiven and at Marley Spoon. Is these people will most likely have some kind of commercial or product background, which means they think very different to you. They think more also in maybe opportunity and growth and potential, and you tend to, coming from a finance background, you think a bit more in what could go wrong here, right? What are we not thinking of? And does this make financial sense also, or does it just sound great from a customer perspective, right? So I think inherently you're bringing a very different view of the world to the table. That's quite valuable. So again, you don't want to be wrong on the details, so that goes without saying. You need to know your stuff, but I think that's not only the details, right? It's also how I think my brain ticks, and I'm sure a lot of people on the call, their brain ticks too, is that we think more of those questions that I just mentioned. What could go wrong here? Or what are we not thinking of? Which maybe some other parts of or many other parts of the C-suite, they don't think that even as their third or fourth question, right? They may never really go to that, and they think always grow, potential. And that's, I think, what we can bring to the table as well, next to the details.
And perhaps we've already answered this question fully, but a few people wanted to hear the responses from Fabian. What would you say is the most valuable thing a CFO can give to a young growth company, let's say seed or Series A, aside from clean books and financial planning?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's related to those examples I gave. So what does the company in that industry at that stage need the most, right? So we gave some examples on revenue earlier on. We went through some examples of, or maybe at times it's really gross margin that you need to show that kind of to improve your unit economics, or no, is it so? There's what at that particular point in time is really needed, and then I think making an impact on that, right? So I always think not just in terms of building the finance house and planning and clean books and all this, but really like how can I every quarter, right? We do, many companies, probably the ones you work in too, we do this quarterly goals, and you think, I always have a category kind of make business impact, right? What can that be? And try to drive that down in my organization too, is come up with things where you can really say that help the business in one way or another, to grow more, to save money, to understand something better, to then later grow more, save money. But that to me is probably the thing where, and it varies, right? But a lot of times, if you were honest, since it's usually about grow more or revenue or bring costs down, right? So I think you need to understand for your particular business and phase, what is it that's super important, and then focus on that. Yeah, like you mentioned this example, I think, of this working with the culinary team on putting the meals together. This was because we knew food cost was the biggest thing in the box, right? It's not the packaging, it's not logistics. So it was the first thing we tackled, right? So that's maybe a very basic, you don't have to go that deep to understand that, but that's one way to prioritize and say, let's rather work with the culinary people first to fix the menu, rather than do all of these other things that we could be doing maybe. Yeah. So that's one. And the other one, obviously, that I'm going to say is fundraising. Yeah. So some founders and CEOs are really good at that. And I've had now with both Marley and Aiven the luck that the CEOs play quite an active role, or the founders, and But in other companies, that may not be the case, yeah, and they're not that comfortable getting in front of investors and pitching the story. And I think that's something that can also really provide value, of course, yeah, because saying the obvious thing here, but if you run out of funding, then there's no business, right? So those are probably the ones I would
I'm
point
thrilled
to
you
there.
mentioned fundraising, because that's where I wanted to take us next.
It's like we planned this, Patrick, you know?
No.
And we didn't. We even had technical issues to start.
We had a question that from the summit, which was, how do you convince investors? So let's suppose you're in this case where the CEO takes maybe slightly more of a backseat and you're up front as CFO.
Mm-hmm.
How do you convince investors to trust your skills and invest?
Mm-hmm. It's a tricky one. I think the best advice is overall, like, don't try to do too much as the CFO. So even if you think the CEO or the founders, they're not that comfortable, then I would rather spend my time prepping them so they can get through like a certain section of whatever you're pitching, and are a bit more comfortable in that setting. And you can prepare people a lot, even if they don't enjoy these kind of interactions, to at least cover the main content, maybe not so much the Q&A, but really the investors, they want to hear more from the founders and about the tech and about the grand ambitions and so on. And sometimes that's a bit clunky if the CFO pitches that too much, right? So I would overall say it's always better, even if they're not fully comfortable, or they are sometimes a bit maybe awkward in these interactions, to rather try to help them. And I think no investor wants to be pitched just by the CFO. Yeah, that would be really weird. And normally it's better to even you should have less than half of the pages or the content in any case, and rather work with them to kind of get comfortable in those settings, which can take some time. But I would say that's probably what an investor would expect much more. And then when it comes to kind of the CFO role itself, I think, being, again, knowing your details and being on top of the numbers. And there will be a lot of times, at least one instance, maybe even a few, where I think a lot of investors actually like doing that. It's just like to put you a bit on the hot seat, and they point at something in your slides and say, well, but that doesn't really make sense. No, isn't this contradictory? And they try to also see how you act in these kind of pressure situations. And I think then it's good to, if you know your details, you won't be faced by this. You can at least kind of take a deep breath and think, okay, it doesn't make sense what the guy says, but let me think again what we actually put in here. What is this number versus that? Okay, there's actually a slight definitional difference, and then you can answer that question, right? So I think so you would, again, you want to know your details, and later on at Mali, for example, when we were listed, we actually did a kind of Q&A, mock-up Q&A, right? So that we had a file and said, here's 50 questions that we think they can ask, and then let's have the answers ready, right? And then you can also give some answers to the founders, and they can just, in a way, memorize them or explain them. So I think there's a lot of this prep that you can help with, but I wouldn't do too much overall as the CFO.
Do you think there's a right time or the best time to start talking about raising capital?
Yeah, I think so what I'm trying to think, like, you don't want to go too short, right? Because then all you do is fundraising. So we had times at Marley Spoon where it felt like we kind of were spending an inordinate amount of time just going from fundraise to fundraise. So 6 to 9 months is probably short in terms of runway, but also we probably never really did a fundraise and then had a financial model that said we have much more than 12 months runway, because then you felt like that's just wasting time and wasting cash in the bank, while we could be growing the business and getting a higher valuation next time, right? So I remember this. I had a famous discussion with the CEO when we raised the extension to our Series A with Lakestar at Marley Spoon, and then the decision was we wanted to go to the US. Said we know that's like the number one meal kit market and we have to make it there. And then let's also maybe consider Australia because it tends to be a good market for a lot of kind of these type of products. And so we did financial profiles, and then the decision in the end was 2 months more runway or try the Australian market, right? And we said, screw it, so let's just also go to Australia and have one more thing that can maybe pleasantly surprise us. And what did I tell you earlier? It did pleasantly surprise us and became the biggest business, and we listed the company there. And so again, so I wouldn't go too far on the I need 15, 18 months of runway. I think that's probably not also the expectation investors would have, what you do with their money. So 12 months, give or take, gives you kind of 6 months. I can just build the business, grow it, show progress, and then I can already start kind of going into this fundraising mode again. Yeah.
Cool. There's a nice question from Beth. What's your experience of arriving at a company valuation when fundraising in a fast-growing tech company? It's so subjective, is Beth's assertion. I imagine that's true.
yeah, and it's whatever I'll answer. My experiences with this have been, probably to sum it up in one word, disappointing how unscientific it is. Yeah, especially for finance people. So when you think there's this whole process that goes into it, and we look at this valuation and that, and out of all the fundraising rounds, how many times it was just like, a quick conversation between the CEO or very quick back and forth CEO, CFO with one of the key investors coming in and doing a quick handshake on something. That's probably more like it in my experience. So don't think about it too much, but at the end, of course, they are based on, nowadays it's probably all about revenue multiples, I would say, right? I mean, when we recently raised with Aiven, we had the benefit, we more than doubled the business, more than doubled the valuation, but we also had the benefit of that some of our competitors had gone IPO, and you could really see kind of what a publicly listed, slower growing competitor would fetch. And then we just said, okay, we should probably have something more than that. But did it ever get to a scientific discussion on how do you come up with that valuation and so on? And no, I mean, of course, no, we raised at 2 billion. So you can imagine that is not magically a round number like that didn't come out of some scientific process. But of course, no, we were approached with 1 point something billion, and then we said 2 billion sounds much nicer, doesn't it? And somehow we had good momentum in the process, and that's how we kind of got that done, So disappointingly unscientific, but of course there is some kind of logic to it. But I wouldn't go into too much detail there. I'd say that's a super structured process. Yeah.
I would like to turn now to tools. And the first one is, do you have a favorite project management tool?
Yeah, we tried Trello at Marley Spoon. Was okay. I think it really depends. I think it becomes really useful. We're now doing Asana at Aiven. I think it becomes really useful if you somehow can convince the overall organization to use it, because now I get this kind of a neat daily or however often you want to see that, like a summary email saying, okay, these are the things kind of coming up as due dates. So if people really give you tasks also, and so if it's actively used, like in a maybe at least in the whole finance team or even in the wider organization, then I think they become quite useful. But I've not at Marley and the Trello didn't catch on because we really just use it for certain kind of large projects, and but it never really was used for like everything or most things. So then I think these tools also are not super useful then. Yeah, interested to also maybe we ask into the audience here what do they use, and if there's something that the tool landscape is constantly evolving. But Asana right now I find useful, so I'm using it. But it's also not something that I said, okay, if I didn't have it, I couldn't organize myself or didn't know what to do. Yeah, but I think
you're exactly right that it all depends on the uptake by everybody else and people having the same routine. We use Notion a lot at Spendesk, and for me, it works great because I
Yeah.
have a system that I follow every time, and to other people, my system doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so we have some issues there.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. That's a good point. I always when I wanna and when I want to get strong reactions from a room of people, I usually say that I use my inbox as a to-do list, and then half of the room will say, "No, you bloody idiot," and then the other half will say, "No, I wish I could," and you know, or a third, and the other third says, "Yeah, me too." And you have to find your own way, right? So I've resorted to this because, you know, you can nicely archive in Gmail, and then you can flag certain emails so they kind of at the top of your list, so you know those are the high priorities and then there's other low priorities. And so, but would I tell you that is the way? No, right? So it needs to work for you, and for me that works. And I get nervous when I see people that have 1,000 unread emails, right? So I will go through mine. I will unsubscribe from newsletters, and I will, you know, file everything very quickly if I don't think it's meaningful, or delete or mark it as spam. So, but that's kind of my approach, and I understand that there's 10 people will have 10 approaches on this.
Do you have a process for sort of monitoring the IT and tools at the company in general? Is that in your scope?
In general, no. I think every function should be in charge of their own tool set. I think when it comes to ERP, I think it is in scope. Yeah. So both at Marley Spoon and at Aiven now, finance took an active, if not the most active role in kind of picking the right ERP, because it can really screw you, right? So at Marley, for example, we picked the right tool, Microsoft Nav, but then we really screwed up the implementation in the beginning, and then it was still super painful. Yeah, but imagine you now be like, I get asked a lot, and you say, yeah, don't pick the tool too early, right? Because your processes are still changing, and your business complexity, like what do you do in-house or external, that all changes in your first few years, and you don't want to have a nice well-oiled ERP machine in the first 2 years of your business, and then you completely change your business model, right? Because the unit economics tell you to do something different, right? So on ERP, I would say get quite involved, but also don't do it too early. And on everything else, I think, you know, each function should kind of do their own thing. I think now with to be quite honest, so with all the SaaS tools, I mean, we are actively looking at some of these like SaaS tool management tools, as funny as that sounds, because I think we're probably easily at 60 or 80 SaaS tools across the organization, and we're not that many people. We're like 200 at Aiven, and to kind of also from a cost perspective and forecasting to keep some kind of tabs on it, but not so much to challenge everyone and tell them what tools to use, but more to just make sure we're not sitting on a whole bunch of duplicate tools and unused licenses and so on, right? So we're looking into a couple of those. I'm sure people on the call know these providers now, which I think that's something that's here to stay, given how many SaaS tools each one of us has.
And specifically on the topic of paying for those SaaS tools, Spendesk might be able to help you there. Just a shameless plug, of course.
Of course.
We had a nice question from Tibor, which sort of we're changing topics, but a nice question from Tibor. Are there any key principles you have in mind as you built your team at Marley Spoon, and as you continue to build your team at Aiven?
Of course. I think this is quite related. I'll tell you why. There was a question in the CFO Connect session on. I mentioned that I had like a reading list, or that I did trainings with my team, or I still do, because we grew the team heavily. So I did a lot of these sessions multiple times. And so first, when people join, we do kind of a team intro, which is now more and more important because the team gets bigger and we're not all in one space anymore. Like it used to be very focused on Helsinki. Now we have people in Amsterdam, Barcelona, myself, Berlin. So just to get everyone in the room, meet the new person, they talk a bit about kind of, I always like to say, what do you do for fun, right? And talk a bit about your family and so on. So we know that person as a person. And but then we also do like a personal values exercise with them, and it's I think I stole this from GE, but it's as simple as, write 50 values down wherever you can Google them from, and then you ask people to go through like an iterative process of saying what are the most, like, give me the top half, and then you'd have them do that 2 times, and then they get, you end up with like 7 really important things to them, and then have them talk a bit about it, like why is it this and not that, and then you get to know them a little bit. So that's something that we do, which is a bit of a homegrown solution. There's a couple of other ones that are really related to how you behave or how you act and treat each other as a team that are quite important to me. So we always do something that's called TKI conflict modes. So it's like a quick 20 questions questionnaire type of thing that gives you a score. And then there's 4 conflict modes, and it's basically, again, it's a bit of a personal thing. There's no right or wrong, like a lot of times with these values things, but it helps you kind of understand, okay, Julian is a bit more like this. For example, out of this questionnaire, you get to know me, and you know that I'm more of a competitive type rather than maybe I find it very hard to compromise sometimes. Yeah, I'd rather find a win-win and spend a lot of time with you, but not like find a cheap, quick, let's just both lose kind of scenario. So that's very interesting. TKI conflict modes, to just sometimes understand like who is the other person that I'm talking to. And if I know Julian is very competitive, so maybe then it's easier to kind of sometimes not be irritated by how I behave, or maybe actually how can I convince Julian because he's a bit like this, right? If that makes sense. So that's something I like to do with new joiners, and then usually the first training I do is Kim Scott's Radical Candor. It's a book, and basically what she says is she's trying to tell people to. She says, and you find that usually when I ask my team members too, is they say it's more of a problem when you're not like open, candid, right? So that's where she's advocating for radical candor. But they try to be nice to each other, and they mistake that for, instead of helping someone and telling them, hey, the fly on your pants are open, they want to say, oh, let me just not hurt his feelings, and then he'll walk around with his open fly all day. That's a very simple example, but it happens in work life all the time that people think, let me rather not say something because it's not that much of a problem, or I don't want to upset someone. And usually this kind of, in a team dynamic, this really piles up and hurts the team in the long run. So I usually introduce this as a first concept, and I say, I wish the whole team would be radically candid here. So we really, you say it in a nice, productive way, but you say it. There's nothing worse than not saying something that you observe, even if it's small on style and the language you used or something like this. And I think that's, for example, something on team building that I'm a big fan of. And there's a couple more books I could mention, but I don't know if people want to hear more about that, or they have different questions. So I'm going to stop here.
We have another nice question from Fabian. If you were doing it all over again after graduation, so I guess you've studied finance still in this scenario, and you still want to be a CFO, how would you educate yourself in that interim period between leaving school and, what kind of work experience do you think you'd want? What would be the best?
Yeah. I think I would recommend to go to like a good corporate in the beginning, or it can be Big Four, I guess. Again, my interest is not so much in this accounting and auditing, so that's why I'm not a fan. But I think it does make sense. So finance is ultimately, it's a hard skill subject. So I'm not a fan. I hardly ever hire into senior positions, or never really, people that kind of only learn on the job, or they didn't have that much time to learn it yet. So I do believe that you have to go through a few different roles in finance over the years, and like, don't take a head of finance or CFO job if you don't have at least, I took my first one with 10 years. can you do 8? Yeah, I was also the CFO of a small segment at GE after 8, so maybe 7, 8 years. But you need kind of a varied experience before that, in financial planning, in analytics, in accounting, in different parts, and also in managing, of course. So all of that takes time. So be very careful with the corporate that you pick. I was happy at GE because I felt like the talent in finance was awesome, and it was great you get the sense of you could really work with and achieve a lot with your colleagues. I'm sure there's a lot of these companies out there, but what I really liked also, which I would also recommend, is this. In the first 2 years of the trainee program I did, there was like 6 months jobs, so you by default got a lot of different experiences early on, and I think that's quite important because in finance, especially the junior roles, are not super exciting, right? So I would always go in with the mindset of, and a good manager or a good company will tell you, you don't need to do that job for 2 years to understand it, right? Do it for 12 months, 15 months, and then do something different. So I try to do that also in my finance teams when I see these kind of young, ambitious types, that I try to give them more to do after 9 or 12 or 15 months, or change their role a bit so they can keep growing and developing. Yeah. So I think this, you have to do it, and not just read about it and theorize about it. So I think you cannot take too much of a shortcut, but of course the shortcut is then to not sit in one and the same job for 3 years, because chances are the second time you do a planning or the 6th quarter close in the same role is not going to feel all that different. Yeah.
And I imagine that's also a potential secret to reducing churn in your own finance team. Exactly what you just said, making sure that people are having new experiences and trying new things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, it comes natural because I was like that, right? So in 10 years at GE, I had 11 jobs, and I worked for it, and I demanded this, and the kind of trainee program in the beginning helped with this, but I think I do believe in that, that it really helped me that in the first 5 years I had 8 jobs, right, and in the second 5 years I had 2, but also I think that was really helpful, and that's why I try to foster that in my own teams as well.
We have 5 minutes left, everybody, so if there are any burning questions, please get them in. There's one I'd like to ask, which is, are there any big mistakes that you think you've made along the way in your CFO roles, and whether there's anything you've learned from those?
We only have 5 minutes.
Just choose one.
Yeah. I think the obvious one, and I'm sure some of you you manage already teams, or you're also head of finance as CFO. So something that I did differently, or I had also managers on my team in Marley Spoon do differently, and that I'm a bit more adamant about now, is to hire experience into finance. So I think at a time like maybe 2 years into my Marley Spoon journey, we did the mistake to hire mostly for like smart, ambitious, young, but lacking on experience. And I think that's one for kind of the whole makeup of the team. It starts to get hard, right? What I mentioned, this giving everyone more to do after 12 and 15 months and moving them around and so on. There's a useful end. There's a useful like end to that approach. Yeah, if everyone on the team is like this, then all you do is kind of having development conversations and moving people around, and you never reach any stability. And then also I think certain roles really do require, like in accounting and controllership, I think they do require experience. Yeah, where it's not just all about smarts. And anyway, even if it was, then a lot of times people get very quickly bored by certain more like routine heavy or transactional type roles. So I think that was for sure a mistake that we did. I think you have to understand that certain roles in the finance team, there's really different characters that you hire into them, right? We talked a lot now about controlling or FP&A types that want to develop and all this, and that's great. And these people have can play a huge role. But on accountants, AP, AR, certain reporting roles, tax, treasury, you want people who've done that before, who are happy with that, and who don't ask you every 6 months, like, what's next, so to also have a stable team. So that's probably something that I took a bit too lightly in the early days of Marley Spoon. And then kind of in the second iteration into all these teams that I just mentioned, we hired a lot more kind of, 10 years and above experience. And a lot of these people stayed also a long time. And it was great to have this stable part of the team as well. Yeah.
All right. I'm just checking for any last questions. Do you think there are maybe, again, in 2 minutes, if you can, what is the biggest challenge you're facing at the moment as a CFO?
I don't want to make it too kind of Aiven focused, of course. Maybe not a challenge, but something that I think about a lot these days is, and it has to do, of course, with what Aiven does. Like we don't do something very technical. There's a lot to do with kind of automation and cutting edge technology. So something I think about a lot in finance is also that I really want to weed out manual work. Yeah. And I think also the tools that are out there these days, from planning tools to what we said, SaaS tools to, there's all kinds of analytics tools now that are out there, which we could talk about for quite some time. And robotic process automation, maybe on your more routine tasks, So I think there's so much interesting kind of automation and tools out there that could really change how we do things versus, not even talking paper, right? But really even in digital, there's a lot of quote unquote manual work that we still do in finance, checking things and so on. And I think that's something that that's also a challenge, because I think there's not that many great use cases out there. And I think that's something to figure out how it fits in with your team and your company. But that's something that I think I don't want to be sitting as the CFO, finance team in Aiven, where the whole product is about automation and cutting edge, and then, everything is manual and only Excel in finance, right? So that's maybe something that I use a lot of brain capacity these days to also push people in my team to investigate certain tools and so on. And hopefully I can talk to you in a year or so about, all the great automation tools and how it made our lives easier. But we're not there yet. So that's still a challenge.
I've had
maybe
conversations recently with consultant accountants, accountants working for firms, where they're going into businesses and helping them set up automation and making sure that bookkeeping is smooth and fast and reconciliation is quick. And then we talk about the process that they have in their own firm. And it's someone in a bunch of Excel sheets using paper, expense claims, all the things that they teach people not to do.
Never look behind the curtain. Yeah. No, exactly. So I think that's what I mean. I think the ideas are out there, the concepts are out there, but is it really, it's not arrived in finance yet. So that also makes it exciting to me, that I think we can create something that's not standard and that's kind of ahead of the game a bit, and it can make for, I think, also more interesting jobs, that I can really, again, it's a way for me to keep people involved and staying at Aiven, because they say, okay, no, I don't want to go back to this other company that does everything manual, right? This is cool here, right? And this, I learn different things, and this is a bit ahead of the game here. So that's something that I'm currently actively thinking about.
I think that's a wonderful place to finish up. Julian, I want to thank you so much for your time this evening, evening for us anyway. It was really, really fascinating, really interesting. And I think people will have got a lot of great, not just technical ideas, but also philosophical ideas, which I think is so important. A lot of great management stuff. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Great to call
we got through them. And
I had a bad conscience, leaving all those behind. So now finally
we can all rest. Thank you all so much, everybody. Keep an eye out for the next session. As I said, we will send the recording of this one and a link to the next webinar that we have coming up. And we just hope to see you all there. Otherwise, have a great day if it's the morning for you, or a great evening if you, like us, you're in Europe. And see you next time.
See you next time.